Tell me your age and tell me which of these 8 foods you're going to start with this week. I read them, and age of the people watching shapes which topics I cover next. All right. The first food I want to talk about is walnuts. And walnuts are actually one of my favorite foods out there. They're an incredibly useful tool that can help you shrink your visceral fat faster. And that is because walnuts repair 2 things that grow visceral fat, and that is inflammation and insulin resistance. And how this works is, walnuts are exceptionally rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they're rich in fiber. There are studies that show that a high intake of polyunsaturated fats for 12 months reduced visceral fat measured by MRI, even without an emphasis on calorie restriction. And the visceral fat reduction that was seen was independent of the overall body weight loss, meaning people lost visceral fat even when the overall weight did not change. And walnuts are specifically rich in omega-3 fatty acids like alpha-linolenic acid, which can calm down the inflammatory signals coming from visceral fat. And visceral fat survives by staying inflamed, but when inflammation drops, the fat becomes much easier to break down. And there are studies that show that alpha-linolenic acid improves insulin sensitivity, which then further helps shrink that belly fat. And on top of all that, walnuts also increase your satiety hormones like leptin and adiponectin. So you naturally eat less without feeling restricted. And the easiest way to incorporate walnuts into your routine is to just add a small handful to your meal, or add them to your salads, or your oatmeal, or your yogurt. Now, the next food surprises a lot of people, and it's dark chocolate. And dark chocolate has been scientifically shown to reduce visceral fat. Now, this has to be dark chocolate at 85% or higher with a high cacao content. And at that percentage, dark chocolate has lots of amazing nutrients. So it has things like fiber and iron and magnesium. And most importantly, dark chocolate would also have antioxidants like flavonols, which are compounds that help improve insulin sensitivity, and they reduce oxidative stress. And there was a placebo-controlled trial that enrolled endurance athletes. And that trial showed that the group that received 5 g of cocoa daily, which translated to 425 milligrams of flavonols for 10 weeks, significantly reduced visceral fat. And the group also reduced their overall body fat percentage. And then there was a 6-month trial published in the British Journal of Nutrition that enrolled postmenopausal women. And what they found was that the daily consumption of 10 g of 99% cacao chocolate reduced body fat mass by 0.6 kilograms or 1.3 pounds, and they reduced body fat percentage by 8%. So nothing earth-shattering, but pretty interesting results when the only intervention was eating more chocolate. But I want to emphasize again, we're aiming for high concentration, dark chocolate, so at least 85% or higher concentration. Now, one thing to watch out for is we just need to be mindful of the heavy metals that are often found in dark chocolate, especially with the higher cacao content. But it's a great food in moderation that will help you reduce your visceral fat. Now, food number 3 that you need to consider is fatty fish. So that would be fish like salmon and sardines, mackerel, and tuna. These fish are some of the most consistent foods that we have for reducing visceral fat. Fatty fish is rich in omega-3 fatty acids like EPA and DHA, which directly reduce inflammation inside fat tissue. And these fats also improve insulin sensitivity, and they reduce fat accumulation in the liver. And that's important because your liver acts as a metabolic gatekeeper for visceral fat. So, when liver fat improves, visceral fat often follows. Now, you don't need to eat fatty fish every day. I think for most people, 2 to 3 meals per week is plenty enough. And it could be something as simple as a can of sardines for a snack, which is what I personally do in a pinch if I didn't get the chance to meal prep for the week. You just need to make sure that whatever brand of sardines you pick has been independently tested for mercury content. But sardines are small fish, and they're low on the food chain, so they're usually low in mercury anyway. Now, before I get to the next food, I want to say something directly to those of you over 60, because this matters more for you than it did at 40. As we age, visceral fat gets harder to keep off and more dangerous when it stays. 2 things drive that. Your hormones shift. For women after menopause, and for men as testosterone slowly declines, fat starts migrating out of the hips and limbs and into the abdomen, right around the organs. And at the same time, you slowly lose muscle, which is the very tissue that burns glucose and keeps your metabolism running. Less muscle and more belly fat feed each other in a loop. And that visceral fat is not just sitting there. It wraps around your liver, your pancreas, and your intestines, and it behaves like an organ that pumps out inflammation all day long. That is the inflammation that pushes up your blood sugar, stiffens your arteries, and quietly raises your blood pressure. So, every single food on this list is doing double duty for you. It's shrinking the fat, and it's calming the signals that age your heart and your metabolism. Keep that in mind for everything that comes next. Now, the next powerful food for visceral fat is broccoli sprouts, and these are not your regular broccoli. They're the baby version of those, and gram for gram, they're one of the most metabolically active foods you can eat. And the reason for that is sulforaphane, which is an antioxidant that can change how your body handles glucose on a cellular level. And this is important because visceral fat grows when inflammation is high, and insulin signaling is impaired, and the liver is overproducing glucose. But broccoli sprouts hit all three of these processes at the same time. Sulforaphane activates something called NRF2. So think of NRF2 as your internal control center for inflammation and oxidative stress. And when NRF2 turns on, it flips on a whole network of genes that protect your mitochondria and calm inflammation, which is not good news for visceral fat, because visceral fat thrives in an inflamed environment. So, when inflammation drops, visceral fat becomes metabolically unstable. It stops behaving like a hormone factory, and it becomes much easier to shrink. But sulforaphane does something else that's even more important for visceral fat. It tells your liver to slow down glucose production when your blood sugar is already high. And that process is called gluconeogenesis. And that excess liver output of glucose is one of the biggest drivers of visceral fat storage. This is also one of the reasons your morning blood sugar can run high, even when you haven't eaten anything overnight, which is something a lot of you over 60 have already noticed on a glucose reading. But here's the part that most people miss. Broccoli sprouts contain 20 to 100 times more sulforaphane precursors than mature broccoli, which means that even a small handful of broccoli sprouts delivers effects you would never get from a full plate of broccoli. So all you need is just half a cup of fresh broccoli sprouts per day, ideally raw, and you can eat them as part of your salad, or you can blend them into a smoothie. What matters here is consistency, because sulforaphane has a very short half-life. It just doesn't linger in your body. So, you need regular sulforaphane exposure to send repeated signals to the liver and to the fat tissue. All right, the next food is blueberries. And that is because blueberries are very rich in polyphenols, and especially a subgroup of polyphenols called anthocyanins. And visceral fat is made out of cells that are very metabolically active, which means it responds quickly when fat-burning signals increase. And anthocyanins send a lot of these signals. So, these anthocyanin signals suppress inflammation pathways, and they promote beneficial gut bacteria, and they increase the speed of fat breakdown and heat production. And we have studies like this cross-sectional analysis that showed that higher anthocyanin intake was associated with a 9% lower visceral fat tissue. And for those of you over 60, blueberries earn their place on your plate for a second reason. Those same anthocyanins that calm the fat tissue also support memory and blood vessel function as you age. So this is one of those rare foods where the thing helping your waistline is also helping your brain and your circulation. A handful of fresh or frozen blueberries a day is all we're talking about. Now, another food that will help you with your visceral fat is chia seeds. And that is because chia seeds are very rich in soluble fiber, which then feeds your gut bacteria. And those bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. And those fatty acids improve insulin sensitivity and they reduce inflammation. And as I mentioned before, visceral fat is very sensitive to gut-driven inflammation. So, if you improve your gut health, visceral fat will start to disappear. And there's another benefit. Chia seeds also slow down your digestion and they stabilize your blood sugars, which then helps with cravings and hunger. So there was a recent meta-analysis of 8 randomized controlled trials. And what they found was that chia seed consumption significantly reduced waist circumference by anywhere from 1.5 to 2.8 centimeters. And as an added bonus, it also helped reduce blood pressure. Now, with chia seeds, I think the easiest way to get them in is by adding them to your overnight oats or your smoothies or your yogurt. You just need to go slow at first to avoid bloating and make sure you stay hydrated because soluble fiber needs water. And this part matters more after 60, so listen closely. As you get older, your sense of thirst fades, so you can fall behind on fluids without ever feeling it. And a big spoonful of dry chia on too little water can leave you bloated or constipated. So, start with a teaspoon, build up slowly over a couple of weeks, and always take it with a full glass of water. And one more thing, if you're on blood pressure medication, remember that chia gently lowers blood pressure on its own. So, keep an eye on your numbers and let your doctor know you've added it, because the two together can sometimes bring you lower than you expect. Okay, next up is extra virgin olive oil. And there was a study that was published in the European Journal of Nutrition. It was a pretty small study with only 41 participants, but it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. And it showed that the group consuming 25 milliliters of olive oil for breakfast, which is about a tablespoon and a half, where the participants consumed this as part of an energy-restricted diet for 9 weeks, resulted in about 80% greater fat loss compared to the group that was taking soybean oil. Now, most of the benefit that comes from olive oil is likely because of its high polyphenol content, which has amazing metabolic benefits. So, polyphenols activate two very important pathways, the AMPK pathway and the SIRT1, or sirtuin-1 pathway. The AMPK pathway is our energy sensor. So, when it's activated, it tells your body to burn fat instead of storing it. And this works in coordination with the SIRT1 pathway, which improves mitochondrial efficiency. And this works especially well in your muscles, where your body is now better equipped to burn extra calories as opposed to storing them. And after 60, that muscle point is everything. The more muscle you hold on to, the more of those calories you burn at rest instead of parking them around your middle as visceral fat. This is why fat loss goes beyond pure calories in and calories out. Yes, a calorie deficit is still a requirement, but two people of equal weight and equal body composition can eat the same number of calories and burn the same number of calories and still get very different results, because the type of foods you eat changes how your body processes the energy. So, the quality and the type of calories you choose can lead to very different outcomes, even when the calorie math looks identical. Now, the next food you need to incorporate is Greek yogurt. So, there was a recent meta-analysis that found that higher yogurt consumption was associated with a 21% reduction in abdominal obesity. And there was another study. It was a large observational study in UK twins that demonstrated that just general yogurt consumption was associated with reduced visceral fat mass. Now, as a side note, both of these studies are observational, so we can't infer causation. We just have to keep that in mind. Now, Greek yogurt specifically is strained. So, it's higher in protein and lower in sugars. So, the extra protein improves your satiety, and it will help you feel fuller for much longer. And this extra protein also helps you grow and preserve muscle when you combine it with strength training. And Greek yogurt also helps you support your gut health, which will then help you reduce overall inflammation, the inflammation that visceral fat loves so much. And this is the part I want every one of you over 60 to take seriously. From your 60s onward, you can lose a real chunk of your muscle every single decade if you do nothing. And that muscle loss is one of the biggest reasons visceral fat creeps up with age. So, protein at every meal, paired with a little bit of resistance work, protects that muscle. And you can do all of this at home. Resistance bands, light dumbbells, or even just standing up out of a chair a few extra times a day all count. Greek yogurt is one of the easiest high-protein foods to get in, especially on the days when cooking a full meal feels like too much. All right, this is not an exhaustive list of all the foods that can help with your visceral fat. But I talk about some of the other foods in this video that you can check out over here. Where in this video, I also talk about the best exercise you can do to target visceral fat. And if you're over 60 and you've been told the belly fat is just part of getting older, I want you to hear me. It is not something you're stuck with. Your body still responds to these same signals at 65 and at 75. You just have to feed it the right ones consistently. I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.